And when a woman starts to emotionally distance herself from you, most men panic. They instinctively try to close the gap, to pull her back, to explain, to prove their worth. They send long messages, ask what's wrong, offer more attention, hoping that more effort will somehow reignite her interest. But here's the brutal truth. That response is exactly what kills attraction further. You can't chase someone back into valuing you. You can't beg your way into desire. What you can do, what the high-value man always does, is stop seeking her attention and start commanding respect through silence. That silence isn't about ignoring her out of anger or playing games. It's not the childish, silent treatment. It's the quiet of power. It's restraint. It's rooted in knowing that your worth doesn't require validation from her. When you respond to emotional distance by backing off with composure, you introduce uncertainty into her world. You remove your energy, your presence, and suddenly something feels off to her. And that feeling, that's the beginning of attraction reawakening. Not because you manipulated her, but because you made her feel your absence. You have to understand the psychological dynamic at play. When a woman senses that you need her response or emotional availability to feel secure, she subconsciously places you in the category of the emotionally dependent. And women are biologically wired to test the strength of a man's frame. When they create space, it's often not even fully conscious. It's emotional data gathering. They want to know, will this man unravel when I pull back? Will he chase like the rest, or will he hold his ground and reveal his strength through discipline? When you meet that space with silence, not coldness, but confident, quiet, you send a message far more powerful than anything you can say. You're not reactive. You're not pleading for attention. You're composed. You're still. And in that stillness, you show her that her emotional distance doesn't throw you off balance. That's attractive. That's the essence of masculine energy. Presence without pressure, attention without desperation. Now, this is where most men get it wrong. They confuse silence with passivity. They think being quiet means doing nothing. But your silence should be active. It should be filled with growth. While you're quiet, you're becoming sharper, more focused, more grounded. You're hitting the gym, you're reading, you're working on your purpose. Your silence isn't empty, it's sacred. It becomes a forge where you build the man she didn't appreciate enough when she had full access to you. And the irony is, the less you try to get her back, the more she starts to feel the loss. The more you invest in yourself, instead of proving yourself to her, the more her emotional radar begins to pick up that something has changed. She senses the detachment. She senses the shift in power. And now you're no longer orbiting around her. You're no longer a predictable source of validation. You've become a question mark, not a period. And that mystery reignites the emotional curiosity that creates attraction. Most men lose their leverage in relationships because they give their energy too freely. They keep showing up even when they're being emotionally starved. But when you withhold that energy, not out of spite, but out of principle, you create polarity. Polarity is what drives attraction. Masculine stillness and feminine emotional movement are opposite forces that draw toward each other when the dynamic is balanced. Your job is not to chase. It's to stand still so she feels the pull, so she recognizes in your absence what she took for granted in your presence. That's the beauty of responding with quiet confidence. It forces her to confront the gap between who she thought you were and who you're becoming. And then when you do re-engage, it's on your terms, not with desperate energy, but with boundaries. She has to meet you at the level of the man you've become, not the man who begged for her attention. That's how you flip the script. That's how you let emotional distance work for you, not against you. Because the moment you stop seeking her attention and instead command her respect through silence, the dynamic begins to shift in your favor. There's a reason emotional control is one of the most rare and respected traits in a man. It's not because it's easy. It's because it requires a deep understanding of self and a commitment to discipline in moments when most people lose it. When you're dealing with emotional distance from a woman, That's precisely the test. It's not about what she says or doesn't say. It's about whether your internal world gets hijacked by her external behavior. And the moment you start reacting instead of observing, you lose. You stop being the man who leads emotionally and become the man who follows her moods like a leaf in the wind. Women instinctively know when a man is emotionally ungrounded. She may not say it, but she feels it. And once she feels that your emotional state is dependent on her validation, her respect for you begins to erode. You can't build or maintain attraction on unstable ground. A woman must feel that you are emotionally solid, regardless of whether she leans in or pulls away. That doesn't mean being robotic or cold. It means being centered. It means your responses are thought out, intentional, not impulsive or needy. Emotional control is about more than not texting her back right away. It's about not letting anxiety steer the wheel. When she pulls away, your heart rate might go up, your mind might race, and you'll feel the urge to do something, anything, to get her attention again. But it's in those moments that you have to pause and remember, the man who holds his emotional line commands the dynamic. You're not reacting because you're not threatened. You're observing. You're choosing your next move based on strength, not fear. The truth is, if a woman can pull you out of your frame with just a few days of silence or a passive-aggressive message, she owns your emotional power. And once she has that, she loses attraction. Not because she's cruel, but because biologically and psychologically, women are drawn to men who can lead, not just financially or socially, but emotionally. She wants to feel safe in your presence, and safety starts with your ability to remain calm and composed, no matter what storm she's bringing. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or manipulation. Emotional control doesn't mean being a doormat. It means when you see disrespect, you address it directly and with calm authority, not emotional fireworks. It's the difference between a man saying, "You don't treat me like that," and storming off in anger, versus a man calmly looking her in the eye and saying, "I don't allow chaos in my life. If this is how it's going to be, I'll walk away." That level of composure is magnetic. It's rare. And she knows, consciously or not, that you're not like the rest. Now, mastering emotional control doesn't happen overnight. It takes practice. It means being aware of your own emotional triggers and learning to regulate them. It means not letting fear or ego dictate your choices. When she's cold or distant, your job isn't to fix her feelings. It's to stay aligned with your values, to act from a place of strength and principle, not insecurity and emotional chaos. And here's the beauty of it. When you show that you can maintain composure during her emotional distance, it flips a switch in her mind. Suddenly, you're not just another man who needs her to feel okay. You're something else entirely. You become a grounding force in her life. Someone she can respect, not just want. And respect is the gateway to deep attraction. She might test it. She might throw little emotional jabs your way, trying to shake you just to see what you're made of. Not because she wants to destroy you, but because she wants to know you. She wants to see if the strength you project is real or just performance. And when she realizes your emotional control is authentic, not forced, that you really are unshakable in your core, that's when the distance starts to bother her more than it bothers you. That's when she starts leaning back in. Not because you convinced her, but because she felt your power in the silence. The man who can remain emotionally grounded during uncertainty becomes unforgettable in a world of emotional reactors. There's a point in every emotionally distant dynamic where she begins to expect you to crack, to double mix, to show up with flowers or explanations, to ask her what's wrong or beg for clarity. That's the moment she feels most powerful, when your silence becomes too loud for her and she anticipates your collapse into neediness. But when you don't fold, when you remain still, focused, unbothered, that's when something unusual begins to happen. She starts to question the very thing she once felt sure of, your availability. And that's when the dynamic quietly begins to turn. See, what most men don't understand is this. Attraction isn't just built in connection, it's revealed in absence. When she's emotionally distant and you don't chase, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability breeds curiosity. Before, she knew your next move. She knew the rhythm of your responses, the way you sought reassurance, the way your world quietly revolved around hers. But now, there's silence where there used to be pursuit. There's peace where there used to be tension. And that contrast doesn't go unnoticed. It strikes a nerve. Because women, especially in today's world, are used to being pursued. They're used to men folding under the pressure of disinterest. But when you don't, when you hold the line, when you disappear into your own growth instead of showing up in her confusion, it hits her. She starts to wonder, did I misread him? Was he more valuable than I realized? Did I lose something that others are about to notice? That's the quiet psychological pressure your silence creates. Not because you're trying to manipulate her, but because you're no longer trying to prove yourself. And that's the shift that matters most. You've stepped out of the frame she expected you to live in, and now she has to reconsider the story. She thought you were the guy who would cling. She didn't think you had the strength to walk. But when you did, emotionally, mentally, and physically, you took your power with you, and that absence becomes deafening. But here's where the deeper layer comes in. It's not just about creating space for her to miss you. It's about becoming the kind of man she would regret losing. That requires work. That requires introspection. That requires you to become emotionally, financially, and spiritually self-sufficient. Your absence must be felt, not just as distance, but as loss. She has to feel that she let go of a man who doesn't come around twice. And that only happens when you stop proving your worth to her and start living in a way that proves it to yourself. When she starts to notice that you haven't reached out, not because you're bitter, but because you're better, her emotional reflex is to wonder what you're up to. She might even test the waters again subtly. A random like, a hey text, something to see if you'll bite. But if you've truly leveled up during that emotional silence, your reaction won't be eagerness, it'll be discernment. You won't just let her back in. You'll evaluate, you'll assess, because you've seen who you can become without her attention, and it's someone you respect. It's when you've turned the tables. That's when attraction flows back to you, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it by not needing it. You didn't just survive her emotional distance, you used it as fuel. You became more. You got sharper, calmer, less reactive. You didn't try to force closeness. You let the space do the speaking. And in that silence, she heard everything you didn't say. Women remember how you made them feel, but they never forget how they felt when you left. So if your absence feels like a relief to her, that's a sign you gave too much too soon. But if your absence starts to eat away at her confidence, if she starts questioning herself instead of questioning you, that's the sign that you've become the kind of man who isn't easily replaced. And in the end, that's the goal. Let her wonder. Let her sit with the silence. Because when you stop reacting to emotional distance and instead become the man who thrives in it, that's when attraction is reborn. And this time, it's on your terms. When emotional distance enters the picture, it has a way of making men panic. You start to feel her pulling back. Maybe she stops replying as quickly. Maybe her tone shifts. Maybe she becomes cold. And the instinct for most men is to lean in, to close the gap, to over-communicate, over-explain, over-invest. But the truth is that emotional distance is not always an ending. Sometimes it's a test. And if you understand it for what it really is, you won't just survive it, you'll use it to reverse the power dynamic entirely. You have to understand something crucial. Emotional detachment is often a strategy, conscious or not. It's a way she gauges your emotional resilience. She wants to know, are you the kind of man who needs her validation to stay grounded, or are you the kind of man who remains centered, even in her silence? Because how you handle her pulling away tells her everything she needs to know about your self-worth. That's what you're really being tested on. And here's the part most men miss. When you respond to that emotional distance with stillness instead of desperation, with direction instead of distraction, you flip the script completely. Suddenly, she's no longer in control of the emotional tempo. You are. She might have expected you to chase, to ask what's wrong, to apologize for things you didn't do, just to restore the comfort. But when you don't do any of that, when you hold your line, stay focused on your path, and maintain your composure, that's when her emotional strategy starts to backfire. Because distance only works as a power play if it affects you. But when you become immune to it, when you respond with calm and indifference, it becomes frustrating. Not for you, for her. The control she thought she had, it dissolves. And in its place, something unexpected begins to rise. Curiosity. She starts to wonder what it is about you that allows you to stay emotionally unmoved. She starts to question why her withdrawal didn't destabilize you like it might have in the past. And that curiosity is the birthplace of renewed attraction. Now, this isn't about punishing her. This isn't about stoicism for the sake of ego. This is about showing through your actions that you are not emotionally dependent on her behavior. You're not trying to manipulate her into feeling something. You're simply anchored. And that anchoring, that quiet internal strength, is magnetic in a way that no words can imitate. It's rare. And anything rare in today's dating culture is valuable. You have to become the man who doesn't flinch. Because in a world where most men get emotionally rattled the second a woman becomes cold, the one who doesn't break composure stands out. He doesn't need to prove his value. He embodies it. That's how emotional distance becomes a weapon in your favor. Because she starts to notice that while she was busy playing with power, you were building it quietly, day by day, through discipline, growth, focus. You didn't chase her, you chased purpose. And now, without even trying, you've made her feel what you once felt, uncertainty. That's how you shift the dynamic. You let her feel the void that your presence used to fill, not through bitterness, not through spite, but through maturity. You show her that love, attention, and presence from you are earned, not expected. And that recalibrates everything. Because once she realizes that her distance didn't make you smaller, it made you sharper, she can no longer take your emotional availability for granted. And that is the very beginning of renewed respect. Respect always precedes attraction. If she can't respect you, she won't feel drawn to you. And the only way to truly earn respect is to show restraint when most would collapse. So when she pulls away, don't fill the gap with noise. Fill it with silence. Not as a game, but as a standard. Because your peace is not up for negotiation. And her distance doesn't dictate your direction. When you internalize that, when you live that, you don't need to explain your worth. She'll feel it in your absence. And when she does, everything changes. One of the most overlooked but powerful ways to turn emotional distance into attraction is by fully embracing your individuality. When a woman begins to pull away emotionally, most men instinctively try to become more agreeable, more accommodating. Essentially, they begin to shrink themselves to fit into what they think she wants. But in doing that, they erase the very essence of what once made them attractive. The antidote to this is not more compromise. It's more clarity about who you are, what you value, and what you're building. When emotional distance appears in a relationship, it's not always a sign of disinterest. Often it's a sign of confusion. She's trying to assess whether you're still the man she was originally drawn to. And here's where things get real. If you respond to her coldness by molding yourself into something softer, less assertive, less defined, you're confirming her fears. You're no longer the man with edge, with vision, with a backbone. You've become another guy orbiting her approval. What ignites and maintains attraction isn't emotional submission, it's individuality. It's your unwillingness to compromise your essence just to soothe discomfort. See, people don't fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with presence. And your presence becomes powerful when it's grounded in identity, not reaction. The more you know who you are, the less you'll need her validation to feel complete. And paradoxically, the less you seek her approval, the more she begins to feel the gravitational pull back toward you. The truth is, women are not emotionally drawn to men who echo back what they want to hear. They're drawn to men who stand for something. Men who can walk alone if they must. When you start living from a place of conviction instead of compromise, you become impossible to ignore. Because your energy no longer whispers, I hope you pick me. It says, I choose me every single time. Now, this isn't an excuse to become arrogant or emotionally unavailable. It's not about building walls or pretending not to care. It's about becoming so grounded in your values that you cannot be easily swayed by someone else's emotional volatility. When she sees that you can hold space for your identity, even when she pulls away, she doesn't interpret that as detachment. She interprets it as strength. And strength, real strength, is irresistibly attractive, not because it dominates, but because it reassures. It tells her, this man isn't panicking. This man isn't trying to buy my affection. He knows who he is. He knows where he's going. And if I want to be a part of that world, I'll need to rise to meet his standard. This is why individuality matters more than strategy. Too many men obsess over what to text, how long to wait, what tone to use, but none of that matters if the core of who you are is unstable. You don't attract a woman by performing, you attract her by being. And the more deeply you live in alignment with your truth, the more powerful your energy becomes, even in silence. Women don't remember the guy who chased. They remember the man who didn't fold. They remember the one who didn't need to explain himself because his presence said enough. That's what embracing individuality looks like. It's living in such a way that your life feels full, with or without her. It's making decisions based on your vision, not her attention. When emotional distance arises, most men enter a psychological tailspin. But if you understand it as an opportunity, not a threat, you begin to act differently. You begin to focus inward instead of outward. You don't ask, how can I win her back? You ask, how can I build something so meaningful that if she walks away, it's her loss? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a standard you live by. In the end, emotional distance is a filter. It separates the men who need approval from the men who lead with presence. If you want to turn that distance into attraction, stop shrinking to fit into her narrative. Start living fully in your own. Because once you become the man who is deeply himself, unapologetically, unshakably, you won't need to chase attraction. It will find its way back to you naturally. When emotional distance enters the dynamic between you and a woman, one of the most powerful but misunderstood ways to reignite attraction is by mastering silence. Not cold silence, not the kind that punishes or manipulates, but deliberate, composed, and purposeful silence. The kind of silence that speaks more than words ever could. Because in that quiet space, something profound happens. Tension builds, clarity sharpens, and respect begins to form again. You see, when you stop reacting impulsively, when you stop rushing in to explain, to fix, to convince her of your worth, you create a vacuum. And human nature abhors a vacuum. She starts to feel that emptiness where your presence once was. And if she has any emotional tether to you at all, that space will begin to ache. Not because you ghosted or played games, but because you've stepped back with dignity. And when you step back with dignity, you send a message. I'm not here to chase. I'm here to be chosen by someone who values what I bring. Most men fear silence. They fear that if they don't speak, she'll forget. That if they don't reach out, she'll move on. But that fear is rooted in insecurity. Real power comes from restraint. Real power is in knowing that your absence, when it's rooted in self-worth, can be more powerful than any string of words, because it's in your absence that she starts to question, why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he explaining? Why isn't he chasing? And the moment she starts asking those questions, the dynamic begins to shift. She begins to reflect, to wonder if she misjudged you, if she underestimated your strength. That's the kind of quiet that breeds curiosity. And curiosity, in the context of emotional distance, is the first spark of renewed attraction. But make no mistake, this only works if the silence is grounded in growth. You don't just go silent and wait passively. That's not power, that's stagnation. You go silent and get to work. You sharpen your body, you refine your mind, you build your purpose with tunnel vision. You rise so deeply into your potential that your silence isn't just absence, it becomes a signal that says, I'm focused, I'm building, I'm not anchored to your indecision. That's the key. You don't use silence as a weapon, you use it as a boundary. You're not withdrawing to punish her, you're stepping back to protect your energy. And when a woman sees that your energy isn't cheaply given, that it must be earned, it forces her to recalibrate her approach to you. Women are incredibly intuitive. They know when you're clinging. They know when you're trying to win them over with words. But when you respond to distance with composure and discipline, it scrambles their expectations. It disrupts the usual cycle. They expect men to beg, to explain, to plead, but you're different. You let time do its work, and you let silence carry the weight of your presence. And there's something incredibly magnetic about a man who can hold silence without folding. It's not just attractive, it's rare. Because what it really shows is that your center isn't external. You're not defined by her attention. You're anchored in your values, in your path, in your direction. That's what makes you unforgettable. Not your words, but your discipline. Now, is silence uncomfortable? Of course it is. Growth always is. But discomfort is not the enemy. It's the signal that you're evolving. It's in that space of restraint where character is forged. Because any man can talk. Any man can react. But it takes a centered, powerful man to remain still when chaos hits. To remain calm when he's being tested. And make no mistake, emotional distance is a test. It's her subconscious asking, can he handle me pulling away without falling apart? Your silence says, yes. Because I was whole before you, and I'll be whole after you. But if you want to walk beside me, step correctly. You don't need to chase when your life is magnetic. You don't need to explain when your actions are aligned. You don't need to fill every silence when your energy speaks for itself. The man who has mastered the art of silence doesn't fear losing her because he knows that if she's meant to return, it'll be to the man who never lost himself.